Hi, welcome to Obscuring Geotags for Conservation. This presentation is going to talk about the best practices for obscuring geotags for threatened species and habitats. So we got our coffee in hand. Let's just hop right into it. This presentation is going to first just cover what are geotags, and then we're going to go through the harmful aspects as well as potential benefits to geotagging, and then we're really going to focus on best practices for geotagging. We've divided this presentation into social media geotags and research geotags, mainly because they are different in how they're used, but also their relevance. So first, what are geotags? The broadest definition is an electronic tag that assigns geographic coordinates to an individual or a photo. Just for note, geotagging is used imprecisely through different audiences, through different people. So what we're referring to here are going to be exact geotags, an exact GPS coordinate saying this individual was found at this exact point, or this picture was taken at this precise location. So let's break this down. I mentioned we're going to talk about social media geotags and research geotags. And let's first define the difference between them. Social media geotags are probably the one that most people think of. They are ones that assign a location to a photo. This is the location tag. Here's a post I had about slugs, and I tagged it San Diego, California. So I'm not intrinsically anti-geotagging as a rule, but I think there needs to be a lot of ways that we moderate it on social media. And then contrast that to research geotags. So these are ones that are really talking about biodiversity data, saying that we found some taxon at this location. So apps like iNaturalist are classic research geotags. Museum records are another one. You can find a lot of those in GBIF, for example, which we had a webinar that recently covered this. And also just your straight up data. So this is actually one of my spreadsheets from a publication I had I think this study was 2017, 2018. So these are absolutely geotags. There's a GPS coordinates section. And just for reference, we've mentioned this before, but all of these presentations do include resources up on our resource library. So we just talked about GBIF. We do have a whole handout on just how to access biodiversity data from GBIF. And the webinar recap is also on the website at learnadv.com. But I'm going to step away from self-promotion for just a second. And let's just hop into the harmful aspects of geotagging. Again, we are talking about specific tags at a specific location attached to a specific photo or a specific species. It's probably the biggest one that we really see with geotagging is poaching, right? You snap a picture of an elephant or a salamander. You say, hey, it was found at this exact location. Well, of course, that makes it much easier for poachers to come in and say, hey, cool, this endangered salamander that can make me a bunch of money. Let me go to the right where you gave me the GPS coordinates and take it. For elephants and larger animals that are traditionally poached for, let's say, not necessarily something that you can smuggle onto an airplane, right? This poaching is usually needed with a time tag as well, which does happen pretty often. So again, poaching is probably the biggest concern with geotagging. Another one is that it can lead to improper use. So this is where everything starts to get into a little bit more of the debate category. Like this is where the controversy comes from. So geotagging in improper use, particularly habitat overuse, is well known with the super blooms out in California. So influencers and everyday people as well, but a lot of influencers will go out and take a picture of a wildflower field, they'll add a geotag, and it encourages a bunch of people to go. And unfortunately, it tramples the plants. So you can actually see these trails that kind of cut through, as well as just very, very clearly trampled plants. This is the one that I think gets the ire of most people. This is the one that really frustrates people the most. And it's not the fact that they're using the land and they're going through it. It's the fact that it encourages so many people to go through it. Always in these pictures, whenever they're showing the influencer out in the wild with, looking fantastic, if you pan around, there's 30 other people waiting in line to get their shot and trample as well. And this is completely unregulated, unguided. There's no trail. So it's just an unfortunate consequence of geotagging. But another way is overuse, and probably the most famous issue is with Horseshoe Bend. This is a incredible location out in Arizona where they used to only get a couple thousand visitors a year, and then thanks directly to Instagram geotags, they started to get 1.5 million visitors a year. So this is a problem because there is absolutely no infrastructure, or there was no infrastructure. At first, this is just a dirt trail right off the side of the road. So you have, I mean, not an exaggeration, millions of people showing up where there's no parking lot, there's no safety guardrails, there's no trails. So this can lead to overuse in terms of I'm trying to find the right words, but if you walk along the trail too many times, you can overcompact it. It can lead to more trash. It can lead to more, more people, more problems, right? That's kind of the goal of what we're trying to get at with this. And this is one that was directly attributed to geotags. And the next one is just your personal safety and privacy. This is something we're going to touch on a few times because I feel like there's a weird, I don't want to say a generational disconnect. I remember the time where we would say don't share everything on the internet, and now we're at a time where we're say sharing our exact GPS locations and when we were there. So my biggest issue with this is that for example, I don't share where I'm at and when I'm traveling until I'm back from the travels, because it is well known that people will just wait until you leave to rob your house, and you're posting and telling people that you're no longer there. So we'll touch on this a little bit more, because when we refer to the benefits of geotagging, so we just covered the cons, right? Mainly poaching, habitat overuse or habitat misuse, and then your personal safety and privacy. But there are many people who will say that there are several benefits to geotagging. And I'm not one to both sides an argument. I don't think that's proper, because unfortunately, a lot of the pro geotagging arguments, I feel, misunderstand the issue or are justifying it in not great ways. So what we're going to do is these are the benefits you'll see pretty often when people say you should geotag everything. And what we're going to do is we're going to first start with the claim and then add some nuance to the reality of it. So first, there's this claim about safety, that more geotags in particular makes trails with few markers safer and more navigable. So essentially, there are many trails that don't have great markers. It's not really well known. There are many people who will create the trail on, say, alltrails.com, or they will tag the trails, and you can find it on a Google Map and follow it yourself. So in this way, it can make it more safe because people know exactly where to go. But I do not buy this argument, and the biggest issue is that we're getting these trail advice from influencers instead of the park staff and professionals who are actually maintaining these trails. And there may be very valid reasons why those trails are not marked. Probably one of the biggest is that it's not an actual trail. It's not an official trail. It is caused by people making their own trails and walking through. So this can actually make things way more dangerous for these hikers. Because if you do have an issue, you say you pass out from a heat stroke, you injure yourself, which can happen even on regular trails, but more likely on off-road on different trails. Park staff professionals don't know where you're at. The people who are in charge of your safety and making sure that these trails are accessible and safe have no idea where you're at. It could be that further down the trail, it is completely unnavigable, right? Maybe there was a bridge that collapsed. Maybe there were some other safety issues. So again, it doesn't really make sense from a safety standpoint, because you don't know that this influencer, this random person, actually understands all of the issues in that natural area. So I really do not buy this argument. And then the other part, like we mentioned, is that sharing the location in case you become incapacitated or are in danger. The thought process is that if you are constantly sharing your location, like the live location share, or if you're like doing your stories and you're tagging every GPS point along the way, that should you pass out, someone can find you. They can retrace your steps. I've always had a big problem with this. Maybe that's just my own personal experience, but I've found that when you do this, it really just makes it much easier for the wrong people to find you. I feel like this is something where people haven't been stalked on social media before, which is unfortunately something I've had to deal with. And sharing a very public GPS coordinate of exactly where you're at and when can make it very, very, very easy for someone you don't want to find you, right? And in this case, if you are worried about the safety, and this is a very valid concern, you can share that location just with friends and family. It doesn't have to be public, is what I'm getting at with this angle. And again, I'm going to re-show this slide. It's not a safety. It does not make things safer, unfortunately. So I really do want to just point that out, that the safety argument is not really well thought out. Now, the other ones are way more valid. I do have a little bit of credence with it. So we're not going to do reality, we're going to do nuance. And the biggest one is that it promotes nature. So taking a picture of a fantastic area, giving them the GPS point can say, hey, this is a cool area, you should go out and visit it. And I think that there is a point to be made here. However, people promoted nature long before Instagram. We've had the nature influencer before geotags and before GPS technology was found right in our phone, right? The simple fact of the matter is we don't need 5-meter accuracy geotags to promote a love of nature. And this is especially conflicting when the parks they say they're promoting, the nature they say they're promoting, and the staff who work for that nature constantly say, don't geotag. So it's this weird thing where the influencers do think they know more than the people whose job it is to promote nature, right? This is something I'm always going to keep pushing back in. And when I say influencer, I think those are the worst aggressors. And unfortunately, it does trickle down to everyday users. So we'll put the everyday user as they had improper education from the influencers. But again, it can promote nature. We just don't need to do it with geotags, right? You can post the picture without the location tag. No one's forcing you to do it. And the second one, of course, is scientific research, right? Geotagging species and locations helps scientific research, and it absolutely does. I use it for my own research quite a bit. I've published papers with naturalist data, and one of my biggest projects leverages that GBIF data pretty heavily. So all of that is directly from geotags, from users' geotags even. And it is true, but conservationists and the conservation organizations are notoriously reserved about sharing locations. And in fact, they regularly develop guidelines about geotagging and geotagging ethically. We actually just submitted a paper that dealt with amphibians out in Ecuador, and we decided not to share the location. So this is a very, very standard thing that we do. But of course, this leads the question, right? We just covered some of the cons, now we covered some of the benefits. But what do we actually do? How do we actually geotag effectively if we're saying that it is really important for the promotion of nature and it is important for scientific research? But how can we do so in a way that doesn't destroy nature and destroy the very thing we're studying? One solution, of course, well, just don't geotag. It's so easy. Just don't geotag threatened taxa and places. It's super easy. We've saved the natural world. And then thank you. That's it. Just don't share it. Well, of course, it's not so simple. It's really not that simple. We can't just say don't geotag ever, or don't geotag only threatened taxa, because the general public is not always super clear about when to obscure their records. It's really not clear. I mean, take this example here. We're going to assume these illustrations from Canva are perfectly accurate, and that the Kaiser Newt found on the left, which has a very, very geographically restricted area, just a few square kilometers, the general public may not know the difference between that and a tiger salamander, which has a huge range. There's thousands and thousands of them. You can go into a pond and scoop up hundreds. So logically, the geotagging impact of these two are wildly different. But we're expecting the public to know all the conservation issues, all the species, et cetera, and that's just an unrealistic expectation. And the other angle that I think a lot of people don't even realize is EXIF data. So EXIF data is a data format which stores metadata about photos. So this data is actually captured within the photo itself. Excuse me. And this is shared on phones, but also your DSLR cameras. And in fact, there are online tools that make it very easy to extract this data from any picture you see online. So for example, here's one of my pictures. I snapped it with my phone, and I just went to jimpl.com, jimpl.com, and it pulled all this image metadata. So the name, the file size, the file type. It also pulled all my camera settings. So this is taken with my Samsung. It had a focal length of 6.7, had the exposure, the ISO, like all that. It takes all this data. And of course, it took my exact GPS point location. I don't mind sharing this data because it's a well-known trail and a species that is stupidly common around this area. But it was able to pull it. So if I sent this photo to someone, they could pull the exact location it was taken from in literally a minute. It's so easy. And unfortunately, it's something I just don't see talked about too often. EXIF data is turned on by default on nearly every camera manufacturer. So what can we do about this? So what can we actually do, right? So we're presenting all these problems, we're presenting all the pros, benefits, et cetera, et cetera. Well, of course, when in doubt, just don't tag. I'm always going to say this, no one's forcing you to geotag your photos. No one is forcing you to say, I found this species exactly here. For the EXIF data specifically, luckily, a lot of social media platforms do remove certain EXIF data by default. Instagram does just remove GPS coordinates, but places like Facebook and Twitter, it's typically removed. It's almost always removed. You can actually remove it yourself pretty easily. In fact, that this website that I just shared, Gimple, has a very easy button that says remove the metadata. So it's very easy. I will say that Flickr, which is a well-known spot for wildlife photographers, so many people upload all of their photos there. They don't remove your data. They actually keep a lot of that EXIF data because that's the service they're providing. So just make sure that you are being very aware of that. You can choose to remove just the location data, no problem. And that's what I would really recommend doing. But also you can change your settings. You can turn these off in your camera. You can turn these off on your phone. I keep the location tag on my phone because sometimes when I'm uploading to iNaturalist, I like to do it in a batch, so it's nice to have that location. But anytime I take pictures with my DSLR, that's turned off by default. I do not like the location on those pictures. Additionally, if you're uploading to iNaturalist, iNaturalist automatically obscures records for at-risk taxa. Ooh. So you can also set your records to private or obscured, but iNaturalist automatically does this. And it has a whole team of curators. You can also select, you can request that a particular area has all of their tags obscured. So you can see in this little figure here, this is on their website. There's the actual point, which is at number 2, but then the tag that is seen is only in this big rectangle here. In the early days of iNaturalist, I used to just zoom out on my phone to basically do this exact same thing. But I don't worry about that anymore because of how well it is secured, and users are very good about reaching out if they need to use the data. And so it's really not too much of a risk if you're on iNaturalist. Unfortunately, this is something that isn't as well known as you would think. So apps like iNaturalist, eBird, all that, they do a really good job of conserving species and whatnot. And so beyond those particular issues, I think it's much better to cover best practices instead of talking about don't tag or tag everything, right? I think that's the big dichotomous fight we see on social media. So again, we're talking about social media and research, so we're going to split them off. We're going to first talk about best practices for geotagging on social media. We're going to split this into 3 primary categories. There's just the don't tag, okay? I wouldn't tag in these situations, blah, blah, blah. We have the obscured tags, where we're going to obfuscate. We're going to make them a little bit less clear about where the exact point was taken, and I'll have some recommendations for how to do that, and also where geotagging is completely fine. So first, let's do don't tag. Private property without permission. I shouldn't have to say this one, but sometimes people really love to rat on themselves and post a GPS coordinate of when they were trespassing. It's can't fix stupid, I guess. But yeah, so just make sure if you are on private property without permission, don't tag. If you are on private property and the owner knows you're there and they're also fine with you geotagging, ask them, then of course, geotag, that's fine. But just keep that in mind. Undeveloped areas, I go off trail quite a bit in the right locations, right? But I typically don't tag anything I find that is on a a trail that isn't an official trail, and that's just so I don't lead to that overuse component, like we talked about with horseshoe bend. Cultural sites is another big one. I was actually really disappointed. I just looked up, I think I just typed in petroglyphs, and I got this image, which I've actually seen these petroglyphs, and it was such a perfect thing because Canva tells you exactly where they're at. And I made a post specifically about these petroglyphs, about specifically why I do not geotag. Because while this photo doesn't show it, if you zoom out, there's phallic images drawn everywhere. There's lots of people scribbling their names saying so-and-so is here, directly over some of these cultural pieces that are 10, 20, 30,000 years old. So I, in general, will always say if it's a cultural site, if it has any type of archaeological, anthropological, et cetera, importance, just don't tag it. It's just not worth it. And then the last one is with species of conservation concern. Again, there's a little asterisk here. If you're uploading it just to naturalist, it's a little bit less of a concern, but this is more for social media again. So I wouldn't post that I found like a Bornean earless monitor out in Borneo and give the exact locations because just for reference, if you have one of these in captivity, it is a direct product of wildlife smuggling. These have never been legally exported from their home range. So now we're gonna talk about obscured tags, and this one's a little bit easier. So if I'm in a park, if I'm in a natural area, here's what I'm gonna say, just tag the headquarters, tag a primary building. So by primary building, we mean something like a gift shop, a ranger station, the headquarters. This is something where someone can go to that park and learn about which trails, which natural areas are good for them, right? Particularly if it's something where it's an accessibility issue. I always tell people to go to the headquarters, contact them, because I'm sorry, I'm not gonna trust an influencer to tell me if something is ADA compliant. I'm gonna listen to the people who actually have to worry about the ADA compliance, right? So I always just tag the headquarters or like the main park pin on Google Maps, right? If it includes wildlife, just go for like a county, state, or a park level. Just say you found it out in Anza Borrego. Say you found it in San Juan, New Mexico. I don't really have a reason why I chose San Juan, New Mexico. I just clicked it on the map. But yeah, so if it includes there, just make it a little bit larger. It's not that difficult, and it still gets the point across, right? You are still in an area, but you're not telling them the exact canyon or the exact creek where they can go and potentially poach wildlife. And then where are the times that specific tags are totally fine? Already well-known, highly visited areas are, of course, great. If you go out to Yellowstone, see the hot springs, come on, people know exactly where that's at. They can Google it. They know precisely where you're at, so go ahead and tag it. This is sort of, if you're visiting the Eiffel Tower, you don't need to tag Paris. You can just tag the Eiffel Tower. And then again, if you're at the primary buildings, right, if you're at the Anza Borrego Desert State Park headquarters, go ahead and give that specific tag because you're there. It gets a little bit more gray area if you're doing trailheads, but specific tags, totally fine. So now where we're going to spend the last part of this presentation on is just best practices for scientific geotags. The social media ones, I think, are a lot easier to implement for people, but the scientific ones are very difficult, and it's something that we have to think about constantly. And everyone kind of has their own way of doing things. But what I'm going to focus on is this short summary from GBIF. That's that Global Biodiversity Information Facility. Again, we just did a webinar about how to access data from this facility. I use it often. And they have a long document that is current best practices for generalizing sensitive species occurrence data. And it's a live document. It's updated live. It's updated often. So how do they do this? What we do is we break it down into 3 categories. It's risk of harm, impact of harm, and then sensitivity of data release. In essence, what we're trying to determine is, will releasing this geographic data cause harm to the taxa it is attached to? And for intents and purposes, we're going to say taxa, but this also applies to sensitive areas, say, vernal pools or ephemeral breeding ponds, stuff that would be sensitive. So we're going to break down each of these more in depth. So we have risk of harm, which is like, could that taxa be harmed by human activity? How sensitive it is, and will that release increase harm? And just to note, this is not an exact science. Determining the proper criteria is about balance. If you're not sure, just restrict it a little bit more than you might feel. But this is really a difficult assessment to do. And I work with herps, which are highly poached. So I generally be a little bit more restrictive with sending it out. But let's first go into the sensitivity criteria. The first one is risk of harm. So really, these questions are directly pulled from that GBIF document. So is the taxon at risk from harmful human activities, and has risk been detected in this taxon or similar taxa? So the example I'm using here is Dudleya. These are highly poached through California, and of course, we have a risk of a harmful human activity. Poaching, right? We're taking them en masse. There's thousands and thousands of them. California created a law to actually protect these specifically. So whenever we say has risk been detected, just remember it doesn't have to be in that exact species. We can use related species as well. There's a classic example where scientists discovered a new species of snake that they knew would be really, really beneficial to the pet trade. And so what did they do? They didn't release the coordinates. And of course, there was no risk detected in that particular taxon, but as we know, many others have been poached for the pet trade, so they opted to not do it, right? So just keep in mind, is this going to harm wildlife? But then we also have a very related topic, and that's the impact of the harm. So this is when we're going to look at, does the taxon have characteristics that make them more sensitive to harm? And is the taxon vulnerable across the whole range or only in certain areas? So in that example of Dudleya, plants in particular are much more sensitive to the impact of harm. Much more sensitive. The reason why is because they don't move. If you put a GPS point down, it's going to be there for years. Something like a macaw, for example, a bird, is going to fly. It's going to fly away. I keep hitting my mic today. It's going to fly away. So it's not as impactful. But this is why I'm actually using macaws, because while they are taken in the wild for a lot of things, a lot of it is pet trade with these. I keep showing pet trade examples, but there's many more examples. But macaws, the scarlet macaw is a least concern animal. They are of very little risk at going extinct in the wild. And that's largely because they have a huge population in Brazil. It is decreasing. I don't want to make it seem like there's no problems. But if you look up here in Central America, most of their range, they're actually extinct. They can only really be found in just a few little pockets. So in this case, sharing a location of a scarlet macaw population found in Brazil may not be as impactful as sharing a location found in this Guatemala, Mexico, Belize area. So just keep that in mind. I need to turn off WhatsApp notifications. But yeah, so just keep that in mind that it does depend on the area. It does depend on the specific taxa as well. And the last one is the sensitivity of the data. So would the detail of the data enable harmful activity? Is the information already known? Like, is it in the public domain? Or is it, do poachers already know about it? And would this disclosure damage a conservation relationship, right? So this is an example of, we know there's giraffes and zebras and stuff like that out in Kruger National Park. We don't have to guess that they're there. That's public knowledge. Maybe the precise location might not be perfect, but just keep that in mind that sometimes your data itself can lead to people figuring out where these species are found. And then would disclosure damage a conservation relationship? This is a particular importance. If you're working with a group that doesn't want to have their geotags, their geographic information shared, and you share it, then that's going to damage your relationship with them. So those three criteria are what we use to determine the sensitivity. How sensitive are these taxa to our data? But how do we actually obscure the data? Okay, we figured out that maybe this is a taxa of high conservation concern or low conservation concern. But what do we actually do? The recommendation from GBIF, and this is one I use for my own research, is to just cut off the coordinates. This is a decimal, latitude, longitude, GPS coordinate. It's the one we're probably the most familiar with. And what we can do is we can just cut off the ends, right? So if our coordinates are at 12.3456, we can just cut it down to 12.345 or 12.34, and that will reduce the accuracy in the range of that point. So let's give a system for this. Let's do a flow chart. So what does obscuring this data actually look at? The first thing I'll say is, are we just going to release the data or not? Is this data going to be available or not? If it's not going to be available, they list it as a category 1. So these are species or records for which no records will be provided, or they'll only be released saying that they're found in a large region. Like, they're not going to give you GPS points, they're just going to say they're in South Africa, for example. If you're going to release the data, you're going to determine, can we release with full accuracy? Maybe it's a red ear slider out in the American Southeast, and they're everywhere, and everyone knows they're everywhere, so you can just pop them in there with full accuracy, no problems. But where we get to know is when things get interesting. So from here, we're going to break it down into low, medium, and high risk. So this is that sensitivity we were talking about. Are the tags at low risk, medium risk, or high risk? And this is what a truncated data would look like. So again, if we gave this data as 12.3456, that would be a very, very fine scale point. That would be about 10 meter accuracy. But by just chopping off one of those numbers, just saying, make that 6, turn it to a 0, now we have 100 meters accuracy. And so these are species classified as low to medium sensitivity. This is category 4 in this GBIF documentation. And it's really just, low to medium sensitivity organisms. So let's say we determine it's a medium risk. Cool. What we'll do is we'll just take off another number, okay? And so instead of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, we'll do 1, 2, 3, 4, 0, 0. So this will create a accuracy of around 1,000 meters, a kilometer. So these are ones that are medium to high sensitivity. It could subject the species to threats. The records could include sensitive information, which could cause harm to an individual or the environment. So this is that medium risk. And then, of course, that last one is just by truncating one more. So now instead of 12.345, it's now just 12.3, and this will create around a 10 kilometer accuracy, so 0.1. And these are for ones that are highly sensitive. These precise locations would subject these species to threats. So this is a phenomenal way of doing things. It's also really simple to do on your data because you just round differently, essentially. So this is not that difficult. And then just if we zoom out and we look at everything all at once, it's a relatively simple flow chart. Of course, this risk level part is the hardest part to consider. I think my default has typically been to put things into a medium category with herps, but I also have some that have full accuracy, or I just tag the research station itself. But that is actually the whole presentation. So next week, we're going to do a webinar on the fundamentals of R for biologists. We've done this one before, but I want to do it just better than the last ones. And that'll be same time next week. You can RSVP. Like I've mentioned, everything we do now goes on the library. We've updated all of our handouts. Personally, I just didn't like the old ones. So for example, our one on phylogenetic signal, we've completely updated it. And now also on the library, we have all of the recaps uploaded. So if you ever missed any webinar, you can go right into it and you can get the full video, you can get the handout and much more. And this video right here, of course, will be uploaded probably in about a week or so, depending on how long it takes me to get everything down. But I leave time for questions and answers. So if you have anything at all related to the topic, or really anything, please, this is the time, this is the place. And I'm going to try to go through all the chat stuff just in case there's any questions in the middle. I don't know what this mic did to me. I just kept hitting everything today, it seems like. I need to get a mic that accounts for my hands. Oh, thank you, Heartscales. I really appreciate that. Yeah, this is, I realize there's not much geotagging information out there. A lot of it is very much so, geotagging is the worst thing on the face of the planet, or this like big, like geotagging is great and everyone should do it. But there's a huge lack of nuance that just ignores what conservationists, scientists, park management, et cetera, have known for forever, basically. Yeah, and tagging the research station, national park headquarters, that really is the best method. I think it's the method that works by far the best because it's easy. It's super easy. and it achieves all the goals that we really want to do. We want to promote nature. We'll tell people how to go find it. I removed it from the presentation, but something I really, really abhor is the checklist style of doing nature, right? It's the idea of, we've all known it. We've all known the person at the party who's been gloating about seeing 45 national parks in 30 days. And that's kind of a consequence of geotagging as well. It's people don't want to go into nature. They only want to do the coolest parts of nature, right? It's a slight nuance that I didn't have enough time to really dive into, so I removed it. But I think that tagging the station, tagging the headquarters, et cetera, can really have people going to those parks and figuring out what nature they want to explore, and for their skill levels and their themselves, their unique selves, right? So there's a question about for GPS studies, you want to obscure locations, but you don't want to lose the resolution of behavior. Is there a way to obscure location? So this isn't, you don't have to obscure it for your analysis, right? So this is like you are uploading the data to GBIF, or you're attaching it as a CSV file to your data. So that's what would be publicly released. You can still run your analyses and everything on your own with the full data set, and that's what you should be doing. So you won't lose the resolution of whatever you're studying, if I'm understanding the question perfectly right. And then so people have talked about so there's a comment about conservationists can work with social media companies to like automatically remove data. There's been a lot of talk about that, and there's been a lot of talk more so from the conservationists are, we're mad about it, of course, but from the privacy and safety aspect, that's where it's really been pushed in more. So that's like the biggest issue, because it can be done. I think it really should be done, but I know it's a really big ask, but it should be done. And so the original question about keeping the locations up for a publication, like the figures for publication, you're pushing it out there. There's a few things you can do. There actually are a few things you can do. So you could generalize it, just like we talked about. So if there are minute behavioral differences in your study, right? There are very small differences. So an example, like I don't know your study exactly, but one thing we've talked about doing if we're doing a behavioral study on salamanders, right? I don't want to give people the exact GPS locations of where to find these salamanders. So we just, whatever our grouping variable is for location, so that could be watershed, even that might be a little too granular at times, is not done, is not big enough. So what we've done is we've abstracted the ideas. We've said, hey, here are all these sites. We're not going to tell you where the sites are, because realistically, it doesn't matter all that much where exactly the sites are. What we can do is we can do distance from each site. You can still say that site 1, site 2, site 3, and then just not share those locations. And you don't even have to put it on the map, right? So your visualization could be spatially blind, but your analysis wouldn't be. Okay? So you can generalize your data in a great way. That's fun. Let's just go to the main view. There we go. So you can generalize your data. This is something I've actually, so my background on this actually started with student data quite a bit. I have to work with like 10,000 student data every year. So we have to generalize it quite a bit. Like we wanted to do, where are our students from? And then we had to generalize hometowns. So we broadened it out to city. But yeah, so you just, in general, it's just generalizing for the figures and publications, because it's totally doable, right? I hope that made sense. What we can do, if it doesn't, we could do a whole little video about that, actually. That's not too big of a deal. Is it just your study sites are like very, very granular, like they're individual streams, or they're, you know, yeah, small little locations? Let's see. Cool. Making sure I didn't miss any comments. Okay. Yeah, I actually have a little drawing tablet, but it wouldn't be good to set it up because then I could show you exactly what we're doing. Um, but yeah, it really is just generalize it. And also, I've never had is showing. Oh, okay, here we go. My thinking is showing close-up Google Earth images, but not providing the actual coordinates. I don't think people could easily find locations from close-ups. Oh no, they can. They definitely can. People are super good at this. And I mean, it's debatable. What you. Yeah, it really depends. Like, this is the problem. So this is actually where you can go into those GBIF documentation, which the handout for this, I'm going to link it into there, and I'm actually going to go in a little more in depth. But you can, they actually have a whole section about could someone identify the location based on other variables, right? And so that's a big thing. And also be careful with Google Earth images. I know sometimes their like usage for publication has been kind of weird for me. It's like gone up and down. Sometimes I can use them, sometimes I can't, and I'm just confused, so I just don't use them at all anymore. Yeah, and it's like, what is that actually gonna? I guess we can back it up even more in terms of a good figure design type of question. Will the Google Earth images really add to that publication? Like how much will it add versus if you had just taken the Google Earth images and just moved it randomly on the map, right? Would that actually convey any difference for the viewer, right? Because usually when we do an image, when we do a map image of somewhere, the biggest pro to doing that is so people understand where exactly it is and they can relate to it in some way, right? If you're a researcher who works in that field, or if you're someone who lives there, you're like, oh, this is my backyard. Like, that's super cool. So if you're just wanting to show it for like a habitat composition thing, that's fine. But I don't, without knowing your study, without knowing your, your research question, you can also DM me on Instagram if you want to share it like non-publicly. That's totally fine. But yeah, it's sort of a, will this figure actually contribute to the study and to the story that you're making with your study, right? I'm also a huge figure design nerd. I love graphic design. So this is something I'm thinking about pretty often. We actually have a best practices for visualizing biological data coming up at the end of April. So maybe we should add a map thing. Yeah, it's always tough, but hey, in doubt, I've never had a problem, and I don't know of anyone who's had a problem with saying we did not share the locations out of conservation concern, right? I've never seen that as a problem. Yeah, and you can always just do like a big area and be like, because I know with the Ecuador one, we just kind of did the whole reserve, which it's a well-known reserve. We want to mention the reserve because that's what you do. And so we didn't show the stuff. I wish I could show you the figure, but we just submitted it, not published, blah, blah, blah. And so we just did, like I said, the whole reserve. We didn't show the sites. We didn't say where they were at. We didn't say, we found all these pristomantis. I didn't find them. I just did the analysis. I've never been to Ecuador. They just contacted me because they know me. But yeah, so we obscured the data pretty heavily. And that's something you might be able to do. You could just say, in the state, like, I'll just say Georgia, because I was talking to them about Georgia. In the state of Georgia is our study site. We were in the northern part, but we opted to not give exact coordinates out of abundance of caution for conservation. Right. It's really not, you don't have to overthink it too much. Let's see here. Yeah, and I'm happy to answer any questions at all, talk more. I mean, this time is you. I try to budget for about 30 minutes for the presentation. I always go over. But then I also give have you thought about going to reptile expos? Reptile expos are a hard one. So I grew up in the pet trade. Like I mean, directly in the pet trade. My family builds aquariums and pet store fixtures, right? So I've vended at reptile expos before when I was breeding. I keep none now, and so I've thought about that, but it's it's like, how do I put this in the right way? I know the times are changing, but it's also not a culture I really want to be a part of. Like that's really what it is. I did do it pretty heavily, so it's not like a this is beneficial, this is not beneficial. It's just something I don't really feel comfortable with anymore. And not out of a pet ownership thing. I think everyone should be able to own pets and all that, but it's just kind of everything that's wrapped up in the pet trade. It's really it's made it difficult. Also with Instagram, some of the worst comments I get, some of the most hateful people, some of the most uh, impassioned individuals are the hobbyists, unfortunately. So it's sort of like I don't really have a strong desire to like walk into the lion's den, so to speak. So it's just it's something I've thought about more and more, but I'm not. Just have some tricky more. I guess it's more personal reasons for not really wanting to do it, right? Just I grew up in the trade. I know it in depth. Unfortunately, it's amazing how much wildlife trafficking there is, and so that's it's just something I don't know. I understand though. Like I definitely agree. I mean, like I would gladly print out hundreds of the books for this exact presentation and hand them out. And I think most hobbyists would agree, but yeah, it's just like a personal thing. So unfortunately, I'd much rather do it at like yeah. There's a ton of modern keepers. It's why I'm not as. I mean, I'm vocal about the pet trade issues. It's one of those like if you get mad about it, then I know, like if you're mad that I say people are poaching turtles, it's like yeah, because people are like you should be against that too, right? Hey, like I would gladly do that. Yeah, so it's a lot of them are, and I know plenty of great keepers. I know plenty who are changing the field. I mean, like that was my family too. Like we grew up with some of the most like the craziest aquariums, the craziest habitats. I mean, I built out one of the designs for the herps keepers is my design. Like I built it out for them. So it's just one of these like I talk about this with my girlfriend a lot. She's a zookeeper, so same but different type of thing. And it's yeah, it's something I would actually like to talk about more in depth at some point. Because there's a lot of opinions, a lot of nuance, and I don't think it's appropriate for like a presentation type of thing. Like I'm not going to do a why the pet trade is bad because it's a little bit difficult. But yeah, it's times are changing, but it's still we look at the 1% and then ignore the 99%, right? It's the same thing. Like just to throw zoos under the bus as well while we're here. It's people are like, yeah, but that's why you only do accredited zoos. That's why you only go to accredited zoos because those are the good ones. Less than 2% of zoos are accredited. Less than 2%. And the accredited ones are not always the best. There's a lot of stuff that goes on in the background. So, yeah, it's really like, and it's always harder, like, not against pet ownership at all. I think animals should be in captivity in a lot of cases, not as a pro bono rule, but yeah, no, I feel you 100% that I mean there is a huge clash between reptile keepers and conservation biologists, and it's a problem on both sides. I mean we can see that in like this geotagging argument, right? It's people who take the extremes either way. But I always like to say that the reptile keepers, there's very, 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 very few times where something in captivity has actually saved the species in the wild. I always like to point out the ocelots. There's a few million of them out in captivity, and they're almost extinct in the wild. Why is that? So that's, yeah. Northwest Trek. Oh, nice. Yeah. And it's like yeah, if you're working for a wildlife park or zoo, it should be AZA accredited or equivalent accreditations of some type. Yeah, it's a weird one. It's just, yeah, because I used to want to be a zookeeper and I wanted to have my own zoo and do all that stuff. But then like over time, it was more of a I'd rather be protecting the animals in the wild than in captivity. It's not like a don't do it in captivity. It's more of a we need people on all sides, right? And I just know which side I'd rather be on. Is the it makes it seem like we're like competing. That's not what I mean. It's like there's many slices of pie in the Venn diagram, and I know which slice I want to be a part of. That's a better way of putting that. So yeah, it's a very very tricky, nuanced thing, and unfortunately, I think the hobbyists are shooting themselves in the foot pretty badly in a lot of ways, and they have been since I was in the field. You know, gosh, wow, I gave up all my animals 10 years ago now. Yeah, so I was like deep in the pet trade about 10 years ago. And like I was breeding. I had like 40, 50 plus animals when I was like 16. Um so yeah, so that is exactly what I think zoos should be doing. This so just for the comments and just in case someone watching the recap later, it's Northwest Trek up in the Northwest. So it's animals only native to Washington. Most of them are injured or orphaned in the wild. They do conservation projects, stuff like that. I need to open up my door because my cat's food is dispensing and she's going to be very mad at me. Apologies. Sprinting from up doors. Um, so yeah, I also work a little bit with the Belize Zoo, and their whole thing was it's yeah only non-releasable wildlife. I also work with an education organization that's only educational non-releasable wildlife, and yeah, I just think that's the way zoos should be doing, and doing native wildlife too. So to answer the question, when I was keeping, I had a few ball pythons. Of course, you know, I think what else? I was doing some leopard geckos. I had a prairie dog. Love Slashy. R.I.P. Gosh, I had some pixie frogs. I was really into day geckos. I had a whole bunch of dart frogs. I love dart frogs. Some Nicaraguan boas, a few blood pythons. But it was like I that was like my personal collection. But then our pet store. I mean, I was managing upwards of like 200 individuals at any given time. So just constantly, if it's a common species in the pet trade or a slightly uncommon one, I probably had it at some point. And I was also really into tarantulas, so I had like I think 20 or so personal ones. Mainly just little slings of like horned baboons and what was it, salmopes. Wow, Matapelmas. There we go. Yeah, so I just had a bunch of random stuff, and then bred a few native things. People would always find eggs and bring them to us, and I was like, oh, I'll hatch them out for you and release them. No big deal. They were always just little fence lizards. Prairie dogs are a weird one. I'll be very honest about that. Not gonna lie, it was the best pet I ever had. You know, I yeah, by far the best pet, but it's similar to a bird, right? It's like they can be incredible pets, but the care required is the issue, right? Like that's always the issue. They do need a lot of social interaction, and mine in particular, we called her Slashy because we got her. She you can't see it on this camera, but she literally latched onto my finger. She was hanging there, nicked an artery, and then I passed out in the back room of this pet store. So it was yeah, it was she slashed open my finger. And then my grandmother took her over whenever I moved to for undergrad because I couldn't take care of it, and so she renamed her to Slesebeth. She's Dutch, so yeah, I love that. I love that prairie dog, but yeah, it's oh, we're rambling a bit. That's totally fine. I'm just gonna tell. I'm just gonna edit it a little bit off. But yeah, no, the pet trade is a very tricky one. Like I have a lot of opinions and a lot of thoughts and a lot of kind of a journey with it that has been interesting because I was full on into it, and then within the span of like, I think a year or so. I was like, oh, not going to do it anymore. I think it has gotten better. But there's still a lot of issues, unfortunately. So, and it's more of a cultural issue than a practice issue, I think. Culture leads to practice, but I think there's still a weird culture in there, but a lot of the old timers are starting to get called out more, retire or whatever. So, and I've met amazing people. There's, it's just a tricky one. Very, very tricky. Because I would get wholesale lists, and I think that's what made it trickier. Knowing precisely how many animals they had and how many times I would get animals with snakes in particular with a permanent right angle in their body. That happened a lot. Oh, sick. Yeah, I mean, if you ever want to do anything, or if you ever want to print out materials, just let me know. I can give you like the print version copies instead of the digital ones. I don't really, I'm very open to it, of course. So yeah, or if you ever want like a specific guide, like let me know, because I make these all for free. I do a whole bunch. So yeah. But I think I'm going to end it here, mainly because I have a meeting in like 5 minutes. But yeah, look out for the for the webinar recaps. I always try to get them up within a week. The handout will be made hopefully by the end of the week. And yeah, if you sign up for RSVP, you can totally. You signed up for RSVP. Yeah, you'll get the recap email. So also all this comes in our newsletter, which every week I just announce everything. So that'll be coming out tomorrow. So cool. Thanks y'all for coming in. And yeah, thanks for the good conversation, the good live, everything like that. Have an awesome week, y'all. See ya.